Gunslinger Jedidiah Storm could see every opponent's death moment before each duel. This ability made him unbeatable. But when he arrived in Perdition town, the mysterious stranger who challenged him was different. Jedidiah couldn't see his death moment, because this man was already among the dead and had returned to kill Jedidiah. The gift came to Jedidiah Storm when he was 17, the same day he put his first bullet through a man's heart. One moment he was just another ranch hand's son with quick hands and a steady eye. The next he was seeing things that shouldn't be seen. Death moments. Every person Jedidiah looked at carried a shadow of their final seconds. Most folks died peaceful, in bed, surrounded by family, old and ready. But some shadows were violent, dark, immediate. Those were the ones Jedidiah learned to read like storm clouds on the horizon. In 12 years of gunfighting, Jedidiah had never lost a duel. Not because he was the fastest draw in the territory, though his hands were lightning. Not because his aim was perfect, though he'd never missed a target that mattered. He won because he knew exactly when and how each opponent would die. He'd see it in their eyes the moment they stepped into the street. A flash of the future, clearer than memory. The angle of the fall, the spread of blood, the last breath rattling in their chest. By the time the countdown began, Jedidiah already knew he'd won. This knowledge should have made him feel like God. Instead, it made him feel like death's accountant, tallying souls for a ledger he'd never asked to keep. Perdition was the kind of town that attracted the desperate and the damned. Built where 3 territories met, governed by no law except what could be enforced with lead and leather. The saloons never closed, the gambling never stopped, and men disappeared into the desert with the same frequency as tumbleweeds. Jedidiah rode in on a Tuesday, horse-dusty from 3 days' hard travel. He wasn't looking for trouble, just a place to water his mount and maybe find a bed that didn't involve sleeping on rocks. The Silver Dollar Saloon was loud with piano music and laughter. Jedidiah pushed through the bat-wing doors, spurs clicking against warped floorboards. Conversations didn't stop for him, which was unusual. Most places, word of his reputation arrived before he did. He ordered whiskey, paid with silver, and minded his own business. That's when he felt the stare. Jedidiah turned slowly, hand resting casual near his Colt. At a corner table sat a man in a black duster, hat pulled low, pale hands wrapped around a glass that never seemed to empty. Their eyes met across the smoky room. Jedidiah tried to read the man's death moment, the way he'd done thousands of times before. But instead of the familiar flash of future violence, he saw nothing. Not darkness, not mystery. Complete absence, like looking into a well with no bottom. The stranger smiled, showing teeth too white for a hard life. He stood slowly, movements fluid but wrong somehow, like water flowing uphill. "Jedidiah Storm," the stranger said, voice carrying despite the saloon noise. "I've been waiting for you." Conversation stopped then. Piano music died mid-note. Every soul in the Silver Dollar turned to watch what came next. "Do I know you?" Jedidiah asked, keeping his voice level. "You killed me," the stranger replied simply. 3 years ago in Tombstone. High noon, Main Street. 1 shot through the heart. Jedidiah's blood went cold. He remembered Tombstone, remembered the duel. Young hothead named Casey Morrison, trying to make a name by killing a legend. Jedidiah had seen Casey's death moment clear as daylight, exactly as the stranger described. "Casey Morrison died in Tombstone," Jedidiah said carefully. "I put him in the ground myself." The stranger laughed, sound like wind through bone. "Death ain't as permanent as folks believe. Not when you die with enough hate in your heart." "What do you want?" "Same thing I wanted in Tombstone. To prove I'm faster." Casey's face was paler now, eyes like black coins. "Difference is, this time when you kill me, I'll just get back up, but when I kill you—" He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. The saloon emptied faster than a punctured water barrel. Within minutes, only Jedidiah and the thing wearing Casey Morrison's face remained, facing each other across 20 feet of scarred wooden floor. "High noon," Casey said. "Main Street, just like old times." Jedidiah nodded once. He'd faced impossible odds before, but never literal impossibility. How do you kill something already dead? How do you outdraw a ghost? As word spread through Perdition, folks gathered behind windows and door frames, not to see Jedidiah Storm win another duel, but to witness his death. Everyone could feel it in the air. This was different. Final. At 5 minutes to noon, Jedidiah stepped into the dusty street. The sun hung directly overhead, casting short shadows that offered no shelter. Sweat trickled down his back despite the desert wind. Casey emerged from the saloon at exactly noon, movements too smooth, feet barely disturbing the dust. In daylight, his wrongness was even more apparent. Skin had a grayish pallor, eyes reflected light like a cat's, and when the wind blew, his duster moved independent of the air currents. They faced each other in the middle of Main Street, 40 paces apart. "I've been practicing," Casey said, voice carrying impossible distance. 3 years and whatever hell you sent me to. Nothing but time to get faster." Jedidiah drew on instinct. Muscle memory burned into bone through countless draws. His Colt cleared leather smooth as silk, barrel rising toward his target. But Casey was faster. The dead man's gun appeared in his hand like magic, no draw motion visible. Flame erupted from the barrel before Jedidiah's weapon reached firing position. The bullet hit Jedidiah high in the chest, spinning him sideways. He hit the ground hard, tasting blood and dust. His gun skittered away across the street. Casey walked over slowly, boots clicking like funeral bells. He stood above Jedidiah, gun still smoking. "Funny thing about being dead," Casey said conversationally. "Teaches you perspective, makes you realize what really matters." Jedidiah coughed blood. "What? What matters?" "Nothing?" Casey cocked his pistol. "Everything ends the same way. Some folks just take longer to figure it out." But as Casey pulled the trigger, something impossible happened. Jedidiah saw Casey's death moment, not the one from 3 years ago in Tombstone. A new one, happening right now. Casey's true death, the one that would stick, the one that would send him wherever souls went when they finished their unfinished business. The vision showed Casey's mistake. In his eagerness for revenge, he'd forgotten that some bullets were special. Jedidiah carried one silver slug, blessed by a Mexican priest and intended for supernatural threats. The bullet was in his backup gun, a small derringer tucked in his boot. As Casey's finger tightened on the trigger, Jedidiah rolled sideways, pulled the derringer, and fired. The silver bullet took Casey center mass, same spot where Jedidiah's lead had killed him 3 years before. But this time was different. Light erupted from the wound, brilliant white radiance that made the desert sun look dim. Casey screamed, sound like wind through a graveyard. His form wavered, became translucent, began to fade. "How?" he gasped. "Some debts can only be paid in silver," Jedidiah wheezed, "and some truths only come clear when death gets personal." Casey looked down at the spreading light consuming his borrowed flesh. For a moment, his face showed not anger, but relief. "Thank you," he whispered. "I was so tired of being angry." Then he was gone, dissolved into desert air like morning mist. Jedidiah lay in the dust, bleeding from a wound that should have killed him but somehow hadn't. As the townspeople emerged from hiding, he realized something had changed. The gift that had made him unbeatable was gone. When he looked at people now, he saw only the present moment, not the shadow of their endings. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell patched Jedidiah's wound with steady hands and knowing eyes. "You'll live," she said simply. "Question is, what will you do with the time you've got left?" Jedidiah considered this as he recovered. For 12 years he'd lived knowing everyone's death but his own. Now he was like everyone else, uncertain, mortal, forced to make meaning without knowing the ending. He sold his guns to a collector in Santa Fe, bought a small ranch outside Perdition, and learned to live without seeing death around every corner. Some said he'd lost his nerve. Others claimed he'd found something better. Jedidiah never corrected either story. He just worked his land, helped his neighbors, and sometimes caught himself looking for death moments that no longer came. But instead of missing the certainty, he found himself grateful for the mystery. Because Casey Morrison had been right about one thing. Everything ended the same way eventually. But how you spent the time between birth and dying, that was the only thing that truly mattered. And for the first time in 12 years, Jedidiah Storm was free to live without knowing when it would end. Did this story make you think about whether knowing the future would be a blessing or a curse? Do you believe some people return from death to settle unfinished business? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe tales of supernatural justice and second chances need to be heard, don't forget to follow the Frontline Voices.